This is part 2 of the recording on how to install SQL Server version 2017. In the first part of it, we installed the SQL engine, and we used this file right here, SQLEXPRADVX30x64, to do the next piece of it that we're going to use is the SSMS setup enu.exe, and that is the one that we downloaded, the second file that we downloaded. It's an executable file, so I'm going to go ahead and double click that file, and I'll have to allow it. And this one I will need to click. Let me make sure that I'm recording. Okay, I'm recording, so that should. I'm going to click install. And again, if I hit a long install here, I'm just going to go ahead and pause the recording and let it go. Last one, the first one, actually, the recording itself is only about 10 or 15 minutes, but the actual time it took to do it was almost an hour. I guess I'll go ahead and pause the tape. Okay, that was an elapsed time of about 5 minutes or so, maybe a little less. All have been installed successfully. I believe that we are. Well, we should be up and running now. So we have installed this. What have we installed? We have installed the SQL engine. And we have installed what we call the SSMS, the SQL Server Management Studio. The Management Studio is the part we will use to interact with the SQL Server. Now we'll test it and see if we are running, and I will go to my Start menu, scroll down until I find the Microsoft okay, where are you? Okay, Microsoft SQL Server 2017, Microsoft SQL Server Tools 2017. Let's see. One of these has, let's see, Configuration Management Manager we will use somewhat. Basically, I'm looking for the Microsoft. Let's go down to the next one. Okay, there's the one I wanted to find. It's in the second one, the SQL Server Management Studio. This is the big gun of what we're going to be using. SQL Server Management Studio. Let me show you where that is one more time. I go down to Microsoft SQL Server Tools, drop him down, and it's the first one, Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. You probably should put a shortcut to that on your desktop. You're going to be using it a lot. Okay, now, for the first login, right, we're going to select for authentication, we're going to select Windows Authentication. We'll select Windows Authentication first. Now, when we come in with Windows Authentication, we will be the SQL administrator. That means that we're logging in with as the Windows user who installed it. Now, at this point, I really need to check that nothing bad happens if you don't, but I need to check and make sure that my SQL Express is running. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop it. Okay, I've stopped it, and I'm going to show you what happens if it's not running. When I try to connect, I say connect, I just freeze right here, and nothing happens. and still nothing happens. If nothing's happened by now, that server is not running, and it's going to give us an error here in just a minute. Anytime today. If you freeze right here, your server's not running, what it means. And here it is, cannot connect to SQL Express, network related, error occurred, server was not found or was not accessible, it's not running. Okay, so if you get that error, in fact, if you lock up, come over here, go to SQL Server, double clicking, and start. When you get finished, stop him. If you forget to start him, well, it's not bad, you just sit there and watch. Now when I connect, bingo, he connects very quickly. Okay. Now I want you to follow along with me carefully, please. We're going to go to the security tab. Right now we have installed this guy, so we are using this. Now we are going to configure our environment that we're going to be using. If you goof this up, you will have to go back and fix it because, and by the way, it almost never helps to go in and reinstall SQL Server. Do not do that. Fix what you have. So we go to Security tab. Under the Security tab, I want to go to Logins. And I'm going to right-click the login, and I'm going to say New Login. Okay. Under the login name, you're going to put your first initial. I use my first initial, last name. You may keep it short. If you have a very long last name, it's okay to shorten it. If you prefer to use a first name, you may use a first name, some form of your name. We are going to click the button that says SQL Server Authentication. This will be your user, the user that you normally have. So this is your routine daily user. This is not the system administrator. SQL Server Authentication, give your user a password. I'm not going to tell you what password you have to give it, but it has to have 8 characters, at least 8 characters. It has to have a mix of uppercase, lowercase, digits, and special characters, at least 3 out of 4 of those. We're going to check enforce password policy. Listen carefully. We are going to uncheck enforce password expiration. Okay. For right now, it's going to say default database master. We're going to have to leave that for just a moment. So double check this. Make sure your login name is what you want it to be. You're going to be using this. It'll be the same one you'll use at school and at home. So make him be the same so that you're setting up your home system. Now, I assume. Make him be SQL Server Authentication. That means you'll log in with this username and this password that you're not going to forget. You're going to check enforce password policy. You're going to uncheck enforce password expiration and not check anything else. Leave the default database alone for right now. Okay? We're going to say okay. Now we have a user that is created. Okay. Close the security tab. I'm going to go to the databases tab. The databases, I'm going to right click the top level, database, new database. Listen carefully, please. I want you to name your new database Scratch, SCRATCH _ DB. Now this means that this is the database that we're going to use when we're just creating stuff just to practice with it. And we're going to be practicing. We don't want to clutter up our working database with a lot of stuff, so you can do anything you want to do in ScratchDB. And that's fine. But I want it named ScratchDB because I want us all to be using the database of the same name. The next one is important. The owner. Make the owner be the name of that user that you just created. My user was SW Smith. If your user is probably different, in fact, it should be different, I suppose. And once you have that set up, check and make sure that the database is spelled SCRATCH_DB. Double check it. If you make a mistake, it's going to cost you points later, and you're going to have to go back and fix it. The owner is your username, the one that you just created. Then I'm going to say OK. Okay, there is the database we created. So here is the database. Here is our user. Notice that we have one more user there, the SA user. That's the system administrator. We won't use the system administrator very much, but when we need to do administrative tasks, we will. So the main one here is SW Smith. SW Smith, or your user, whatever your user is named, owns ScratchDB. We don't like having spaces in these names. We don't want spaces in anything. Underscores are okay, but we don't like spaces. I'm going to right-click it, right-click my username, right-click, go to Properties. This brings up this window we were in a minute ago. And I told you to leave the default database set to master, okay? We're now going to make a change. We're going to change that default database. A minute ago, all we had was master, but now we have another database. We have a database named ScratchDB. So drop down the menu and select ScratchDB. It's a database that you own, and this is your default database. And when you come into it, you're going to create this database. You're going to create your stuff here, anything that you create. I'm going to say OK. And now I am ready to begin using my database. One of my options here, I have two plugs there, connect and disconnect. I'm going to click the red X one right there, that one that says red X. I'm going to disconnect. I'm no longer connected, and now I'm going to go connect. This time I'm going to connect with SQL Server authentication. Don't worry about anything that it shows there. My login is login that I created. The password is my password. You may click remember password if you want to. It's up to you. This is your server. And I'll click connect. And now I am connected. The databases that I can see ScratchDB because that is mine. Okay. Now I'm going to test it. I'm going to go to New Query. This is a new database program. Here's my query. Object Explorer is what I had open a minute ago. The new query is here. I'm going to begin the query by saying use Scratch. All of our programs will begin by saying use and the database name. If I don't say use a particular database, it's going to go to ScratchDB because that's my default. But I'm going to say use ScratchDB anyway. If you don't say that, I'm going to take a point off of your grade because we're supposed to always say what database we are using. You might have 15 or 20 in here. Right now we only have one. There's only one you could be using. But we're going to get into practice of saying that anyway. I'll talk more about the format here. Now I'm going to create something. I'm going to say create table, test. I'm going to open up parentheses. I'm going to tab once inside that parentheses. This is just for format. And now I'm going to create a field in my table. And my field is going to be named, let's call it F1. And it is of type integer. I could put a comma and add other fields. For example, I'd better put my comma, comma, and then I could have another field, F2, and that could be of type character. That could be a 2-character field, perhaps a state abbreviation or something. When I get to the end, I do not end in a comma. I put my semicolon. Excuse me, I close my parentheses and put the semicolon, and it's usually a good practice to press enter. This is my first SQL program that we have written for this class, and I am now going to create this table that says test. In this object, in this query window, you'll find that you can highlight things and run just that little piece of it, or you can run the whole thing. I'm going to run the whole thing by not selecting any part, and I'm going to say execute, and I got the message commands executed successfully, which is what I like seeing because that tells me that my database is running. If I go back to the Object Explorer now, and I go to Scratch Database, and I drop him down and I look at the tables, I find that I have a table named test. The DBO dot in front of it means database owner. I own who's the owner of this database. The owner owns a table in here called test. And I can put data into that table and retrieve data from that table. We now have a working database. We are ready now to go wild programming in ITSE 2309. You have your database installed and running. When we are done with him, we have not saved this file. The table is saved. Databases are very good. This table is saved from anything except a near asteroid strike. The program itself is not saved. I probably won't save it. I can. If I save it in the file system. So it might not be a bad idea to practice that once. I'm going to have a save. Save it where? Well, I need to get a place to save it. So I guess I'll go over to Colin, ITSE 2309, and I guess I will create a folder here. What shall I call it? How about spring 2019? That's where my R, isn't it? And I'll go in there, and I will name my query test. Test.sql. Now this file is .sql. It's just a text file. It could have been created in Notepad just as easily. You save it with a .sql extension and you can load it right in there and run it. Nothing special about this file. You could save your shopping list here just as easily. This is just a source code and it is executed one line at a time. If you make a mistake in here, and I have some stuff in there, it doesn't make any sense. First thing, I get a red underline in it telling me it's probably a mistake. And when I try to execute it, I get this error message that says I made a mistake. Many times you might not have these numbers in here. I don't recall turning them on. I guess they might be on in general for SQL Server. I'm going to show you how to turn them on if they are not on for you. You go to your Tools tab. Here's your tabs up here. See the Tools? Tools. Drop him down to Options, Tools, Options. Under the Options, go down to Text editor, open him up. All languages, open him up. General. And you see this button right here, line numbers. Click line numbers, make sure he is checked, and say OK. And your line numbers should appear. Mine were already on. Once you get rid of that problem with it and you now execute him. Oh, by the way, we have a little issue here because the second time that we did this table, the table already exists. So I can only run this code once. We're going to fix that, but I'm not going to fix it right now. So if it says there is already an object named test in the database, I'm just going to tell you, don't worry about that. That means everything's fine. If you look over here and you see in the under Scratch DB, under tables, if you see your table named test, everything's fine. You could right-click it if you wanted to. And let's see, is there a delete? Yes, delete. And then say, this is a little drastic, but then say, okay. Now he goes away. Now you would be able to come back over here and execute again. And it would say, yes, I have. But if you try to execute a second time, he's already there. So he won't let you create a table that already exists. We have a way to fix this, and we'll fix it later. For right now, I'm going to call it a day here. Let's see, we've saved everything. So when I close him, he says, fine, closed. I can close this, this window. It is usually a good idea to disconnect. I can close this window. Now, my database engine is still running. So to avoid leaving that guy running, like leaving my car running at night in my driveway, I'm going to go over here to SQL, SQL Server, SQL Express. He's running. I don't want to leave him running. I'm done with him. I'm about to log off here and say goodnight and stop him. As soon as he says stopped, everything's fine. Close him, and we are ready to go and do whatever we want to with our computer. I don't like having that SQL Server running because he causes my internet browser to run more slowly, and he just generally bogs down lots of stuff. So I don't like leaving him running. When I'm working on the SQL Server, I typically like to get out of other stuff. It's not a good idea to have a whole bunch of stuff running besides the SQL Server because they tend to be memory pigs and processor hogs. So we like to shut them down when we're not using them. Now, the ones at school, we just leave them running because that's the only thing that the server at school does. But yours at home, I'm sure you're doing other things with your server besides SQL with your computer besides SQL Server. So it's good practice to just get in the habit of shutting it down when you're not using it and then turn it back on. It only takes you a few seconds. And with that, I'm going to end this, and I'll see you guys in class. I'm going to send this out via email. Bye-bye.